My name is Brandon Santiago, and I work with an organization called YouthSpeaks. YouthSpeaks is a nonprofit right here in San Francisco, and what we do is we use spoken word as a tool to combat illiteracy. So a little about my story, and I'm going to share a poem with you in a second, but I grew up in San Francisco with a single-parent mother. Story not really unique, but definitely one that you guys have heard before. I dropped out of high school twice, once as a sophomore. That didn't really feel right, so I thought I'd try it again. That's a bad joke. And again, as a senior, I never actually finished high school. I went from the 8th grade to junior college to San Francisco State and then eventually to USF now where I'm getting my master's. And to me, that's a huge part. Thank you. My master's in education, the serendipitous of it is great. So to me, that's a huge part of my story, and it's important that I always talk about this in the poems that I write. So I wrote a poem reflecting on my experiences in San Francisco and also on some of the young people that I've met since I've been working with youth. I was kicked out of my first high school the day before class. And nowadays, I wake up to the soft sound of a nostalgic regret playing over my morning prayers. Dear God, thank you for this day and direct my path. Working for a youth development organization, I spend most of my time telling young folks to stay in school. The irony feels like a swift punch to my ego every time I catch myself giving that typical, "I've made those mistakes already" speech. So I've learned to disguise them with phrases like, "Oh, homie, school to get you paid," or "all the cuties go to college." He replies with a youthful pessimism. I say, "Look, just don't follow in my footsteps. Learn from the path I've already taken and create your own." I'm reminded of where I come from when I walk into most high schools, faced with that unholy deja vu of students drifting like nomads between classrooms. Hallways become a permanent purgatory for failures. But I'm starting to learn there's a fine line between ignorant and bred to be uneducated, and some might call that line segregated, a filthy word to a public school principal and the Board of Education, especially in a city known for progression. So pardon me for a moment while I digress. See, I can't help but notice that classrooms look more like the Red Sea, split in half by Moses' staff, separating students by more than color. But it's funny how brown folks still find their way to the back. And when test scores reflect budget cuts, teachers play hot potato with the kids that can't read. Just send them to the basement. Special education is the new segregation, while standardized tests are the sequel to separate but equal. But test scores can only reflect accessibility to information. We can't get the answer right if we don't understand the question. So every day I pray for wisdom. While SATs separate saint from sinner, student from statistic, private from public, and in a city as diverse as San Francisco, people of color make up 50% of the population and 90% of the public schools. It's no coincidence, it's beautifully deliberate. Our state invests $230,000 for every juvenile in prison, as opposed to $8,000 for a student in the Oakland public schools. In other words, they invest more when we fail. So they won't send us to study hall, they'd rather send us to jail. Fire our teachers and replace them with correctional officers. Turn our public schools into play penitentiaries. Prepare a third of our entire generation to be incarcerated and tell you there is no such thing as segregation. But young man, believe me when I say you will always be Brown versus the Board of Education. And I can't help but see myself in you. I was bred to be a worker too, taught to fill out a job application before I ever learned to apply for college. My counselor suggested I stick with something simple, told me garbage men get great benefits, so I threw away my education. High school dropout, twice removed, stuck at a community college, a place where more often than not, dreams of higher education go to die. And classes fill up faster than emergency rooms, so students drop like flies. And there I was in one more class I didn't need, trying to stop flirting with these illusions of grandeur. I'm thinking if junior college is hell, well, heaven must be something like Stanford. So every day I pray to be forgiven, because sometimes I feel like brown skin is the cardinal sin. And sometimes I feel like Moses wandering an ocean of dust searching for my promised land. Well, my people pray to idols, replacing golden calves for golden bears. And I don't have the heart to tell them that Berkeley's only public to folks who had a private education. But I wonder if at this moment he can smell the hypocrisy on my breath when I say just do your best, that's all that counts. Knowing I've already graduated from a college that will probably reject him. Submitted my life story in 3 pages or less and let them call it my personal statement. Let them test me until I become standard in hopes that one day they can see me as some kind of equal. But I remind myself that I'm doing it for him, so that no institution, whether it's public school or prison, can ever validate who we are. So nowadays, I go to sleep to the uneasy sound of an apprehensive retribution rising over my evening prayers. Dear God, let us never forget, we are all sacred and equal.